Good evening, everyone. I am Joseph Cotto, and let me tell you about an epic story of victory, defeat, friendship, betrayal, heroism, cowardice, deep respect, blind hatred, and above all else, the struggle for survival. It is my new book, Runaway Masters, a true story of slavery, freedom, triumph, and tragedy beyond 1619 and 1776. Check it out on Amazon by following the link below. The paperback is $9.99 US, while the Kindle version is $4.99 US. If you are a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, you can read it for free. Hope that you enjoy the book. Joining me tonight is Lipton Matthews. Lipton, how's it going?
I'm great. And how are you doing, Joseph?
Doing very well. I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation. It's been a while since we last conversed. Obviously, Paul was around for the last chat, but he is sort of indisposed right now, but he'll be back sooner or later.
All right.
Yeah, he's recovering well. The titanium ribs take some effort, I guess, in adapting to, but he is recovering well. And it's amazing because after his accident, he was able to walk home from the scene of the accident, and his doctor was shocked that he was able to accomplish that. His doctor was surprised that he was able to pull through, period. So Paul is a very strong guy, and he is very much recovering and looking forward to returning to Chronicles and, of course, Cato Gottfried.
Yes, Paul Gottfried is a man of a more masculine era. I respect him even more. He was hit by a vehicle and he went home.
Yeah, exactly.
The modern man is so weak. They complain and they cry, but Paul's such a strong guy.
Exactly. And I think when he hears this, he will find that to be a very high compliment indeed.
Yes, but let me tell you, Joseph, I'm happy that he's alive because had he died, you guys would not have been able to contain me. No.
If something terrible like that happened to Paul, a lot of people would have been beside themselves. It would be a crime against humanity. Really.
Yes, like this would be a reason to literally burn down the country. Like, sorry, but yes.
Gottfried lives matter. That would be a great
Yes,
slogan.
you couldn't contain me. You couldn't contain me. Sorry.
No problem. No, but no, Paul is doing better, and he will be back, and we're all very glad. And by the way, folks, if you have a reasonable, responsible question or comment for Lipton or myself, please feel free to leave it via Streamlabs and throwing the link into the live chat. So we're going to be discussing a few different things tonight. First is the content of the book, which obviously has to do with slavery. Then we'll be getting into a very interesting article which Lipton wrote about IQ and Eurocentric civilization. But anyway, talking about the book and slavery, Lipton, this was something you had wanted to discuss. I wrote the book because a lot of people have very, how do I put this, skewed perspectives about what slavery entailed, about what it meant in the context of U.S. history, and they obviously have erroneous perceptions about what it means in the broader context of Western history. But the book pertains to stuff that happened in what was either the U.S. or what's now the U.S. It's a book about the Seminole tribe in Florida, American Indian tribe, and they held slaves, and they held them in a different way than the white man did. It wasn't chattel slavery. It was like more a form of feudalism, but it was still technically slavery. And to make a long story short, after 3 different wars, the Seminole was eventually totally defeated by Uncle Sam after the Civil War because he sided with the Confederacy, and the U.S. imposed on the Seminoles, at least the ones who surrendered, and because of that, they left Florida and went out to what's now Oklahoma. But the U.S. government imposed on the Seminoles a mandate that they no longer have slaves. So actually, when it comes to the Seminoles and slavery, it was Uncle Sam, the white man, who liberated slaves, black slaves, from the red man, the American Indians, of the Seminoles. It's really a fascinating story, and I've only pretty much scratched the surface of it. But it challenges a lot of narratives, a lot of ideas that people have about slavery. It was much more of a multiracial endeavor than folks would like to think. So the white man did end it, and yet at the same time, nowadays in the U.S., people talk about slavery as an indictment against the white race on the whole, not only back in the day, but in the present day, even though slavery has been outlawed for generations on end. So it's really a bizarre situation we find ourselves in, and I hope that the book can give people some historical, how do I put it, footing, so they could understand current events a bit better than they might have otherwise.
Yes, I really look forward to reading your book, Joseph. I
That's it.
might buy it, but if you're a kind person, you may just send me a free copy, and I promise I won't reproduce it by sending it to someone else.
Certainly. Well, I would be very glad to send you a copy. We'll chat about that after the show ends. But I know that would be great. But anyway, I hope you do enjoy it. But I think slavery is something. It's an issue that basically is being used to tear apart the West, but especially the U.S. Because of the history of slavery in America, and the context in which this is being done is really bizarre because people are misinterpreting history, they're misapplying historical facts to the present, and they're trying to create, I think, a political narrative for the future, which would basically hold that, the Western kind and the U.S. in particular are somehow evil. They've committed the original sin of slavery, and therefore they're irredeemable. So anything is better than what we have now or what we've had in the past. Really an interesting state of affairs, to say the absolute least.
And John Hope Franklin, the late black historian, he also wrote a bit on the topic, and he argues that some black people were actually interested in slavery for economic purposes.
Mhm. Certainly. Where you are in Jamaica, Lipton, what is the general perspective on slavery nowadays? How is it handled in society there?
So, what's fascinating is that historically Jamaica produced quite brilliant intellectuals. So there was a man called Joel Augustus Rogers, and Joel Augustus Rogers wrote several books, and in one of his books he mentioned the black ownership of slaves. But for the most part, it is not a society that's historically literate. However, intellectuals like to rehash the atrocities of slavery, but they don't speak about blacks owning other blacks or mulattoes owning blacks. So, for example, few people in Jamaica are interested in reparations at the University of the West Indies. I'm yet
Mhm.
to see a poll to discover if average Jamaicans are supportive of reparations, but elites seem to care about the issue. So, for example, our major newspapers, some of their columnists and editorials often write in favor of reparations. But blacks in Jamaica own slaves, and we know this because of historical writing and research. So, for example, the Moncrief, they were mulattoes and they owned slaves in St. Anne in Jamaica.
Mhm.
And they were also compensated after the abolition of slavery.
It's really fascinating because Jamaica was a society that was, that there was such a traditionally a large agricultural sector there that slavery was, integral to the economy of Jamaica. Also, it was a place where slaves were produced and shipped out to other places. But Jamaica was very similar to the American South in a host of ways. And I think it's fascinating that you have this sort of history between the South and the Caribbean that's very, very similar. In many respects, the history of the South is more similar to that of the Caribbean than it is to the rest of the United States.
Yes, and but the slave economy in Jamaica was diverse. There were crops like pimento and coffee. The coffee
Mhm,
sector was closer in the levels of competitiveness to sugar, but
mhm,
for the most part, it was unsuccessful. During the early period, coffee did well, but it was just unable to compete with the global market. And
mhm,
coffee planters were not absentee planters. They actually resided in Jamaica, but their plantations still failed. There's an argument in the historiography of the Caribbean that some estates were unsuccessful because the planters resided abroad. But coffee planters, they have debunked this claim because many of them resided in Jamaica, but the industry remained uncompetitive.
mhm. But it's something else because right now in the Caribbean, it's not nearly as bad as this in the US, but there is something of a desire among some people, as you mentioned, for reparations or for, a sort of wholesale degradation of the past. And what's happening, not in Jamaica, but in Barbados, is that they have decided, the government there, to sever themselves from the British Crown, and they will be establishing a Barbadian republic later this year in November, as a matter of fact. And Barbados is interesting because, unlike Jamaica, it does not have a party of the center right and the center left. It has essentially one party of the center left and one party of the even farther left, which is really bizarre because Barbados was the most English of the British Caribbean holdings, but there it is. Any thoughts on the situation in Barbados?
Yes, I'm quite elated that you're referring to Barbados. Melanie Newton has a book on Barbados, and like many writers, Melanie Newton argues that that the Bajans were like the British. Barbados, unlike Jamaica in the 60s and 70s, appropriated British cultures and institutions. The Bajan middle class admired British. Barbados was referred to as Little England. So what you're
Mhm.
saying is quite troubling because historically the Bajans have lurched to the right, not the left, like Jamaica. So,
Mhm.
for example, during the 70s, the Bajans kept government ownership of assets to a minimum in relation to Jamaica. And for
Mhm.
citation, you may consult Peter Blair Henry. So what's occurring in Barbados is troubling, and furthermore, it compounds other issues because and Herman Hoppe is actually correct. The evidence is rich. Monarchies on average actually do better than democracies. America is a stable republic, but on average, presidential systems are corrupt and defective.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate, obviously, of constitutional monarchism. It's not just because I'm a knight and a baron, but it's because I really do believe that constitutional monarchy is the best form of government given the stark realities of human nature. And the less developed a society is, the more powerful the monarchy should be. But in a highly developed society, or at least in a mid range developed society, you really do well with a constitutional monarchist government that is responsive to the needs of the people, but at the same time, it offers a sense of stability, which you just don't get with presidential republics. Now, there are some exceptions, very, very small places like San Marino or Andorra, but even Andorra technically has a co prince. But just using someplace like San Marino or ancient Athens, that works well as a republic, and that's fine. But that's a tiny place that's very homogenous and it's easy to control. But when you have a large country with many different types of people and a national identity that's fluid, or perhaps, as in the case of the United States, one that's going out the window, or perhaps it's already gone out the window, a republic is not good because it creates a winner take all system, obviously, in politics, and it offers no real stability beyond a constitution. And in the US, with our constitution, it doesn't mean a damn thing because it can literally have its meaning changed throughout the day, depending on what the federal court system has to say. So, constitutional monarchy is good. It prevents all the power from being in the hands of a chief executive. It creates a necessary separation of powers. It's much more stable and effective than a constitution that, is basically like something that morphs into something else. And I think it's a highly desirable form of government, and I strongly advocate for
For example, Joseph, monarchies militate against the effects of reform because the
it. Mhm.
monarch is a symbol of political unity. Therefore, the monarch is in a position to cultivate social capital, and social capital can be invoked as a lever to get people to
Mhm.
support contentious reforms. So, poorer countries can afford monarchies because they're in need of reforms to a greater extent than wealthy countries. And
Mhm.
also, Joseph, smaller republics, when compared to smaller monarchies, are more likely to go to war. I
Yes.
have an article on the topic for Mises.org.
Mhm. No question.
Monarch,
Yeah. Go
and
ahead. Sorry.
monarchies also predict protection for property rights.
Mhm. It's absolutely it does. There's no question. Republics offer instability, and you saw that in Africa when there was decolonization, where unlike in the Caribbean, where people generally wanted to keep the British crown as at least a nominal head of state, in Africa they wanted total, abolition of anything to do with the colonial past, and as a result, these very feeble, very poor republics wound up going to war with themselves and each other over really, petty stuff. And they all had these names like Democratic Republic, People's Republic, Republic, so on and so forth. And it was meant to emulate this sort of American style democracy, Jeffersonian democracy. But it just didn't work out very well because I think the truth of the matter is that Jeffersonian democracy and Republican models, moreover, are not very well attuned to the stark realities of human nature.
Africa is a diverse continent. Academics refer to the situation in Africa as ethno-linguistic fragmentation, and
Mhm.
diversity is usually a negative if leaders are unable to ensure that people can cooperate properly. As long as individuals are able to cooperate, we can derive the benefits of diversity. But in the grand scheme of living and life, people are more likely to trust their in group, not the out group. And
Certainly.
in Africa, it is still a tribal society. So there are studies arguing that there's a relationship between pre-colonial tribalism and modern political development in Africa. Africa is a tribalistic society and it's also clannish. And in that framework, having a leader who claims to represent all people can be problematic. And again, for Africa, I would really recommend decentralization. So many of these big states in Africa should become smaller territories.
Well, in Uganda, they had their issues with Idi Amin. Obviously, that was horrendous. And what happened after that was people there in power realized that decentralization was necessary. And so what happened was that they reinstated traditional monarchies that operate within the laws of the republic, but the monarchies hold power at the local level. And so today, Uganda is a republic and a monarchy, or a series of monarchies, and the monarchies are much more effective at maintaining order and some sense of stability and peace, really, than the republic ever was. So what you're saying is absolutely correct, and the story of Uganda proves that.
And we can also tell our viewers to read Eric von Ledin and Michael Howard. A monarchy is basically a private government. The monarch
Yes,
is
it is.
interested in bequeathing property to his descendants, whereas in a democracy, leaders have a high time preference because the country is not their direct resource. And again, modern writers, economists who are not affiliated to libertarianism are actually arguing that hereditary rule is better for long-term development and can protect property rights. Political leaders find it easy to succumb to populism, whereas the monarchy will think long-term. And again, this is another crucial point. Historically, monarchs fought their wars. Nobles paid mercenaries. Under democratic rule, the army is usually conscripted, and in order to win a war, you must ensure that soldiers are motivated. And one way to increase motivation is to promote nationalism.
Certainly. No question about it.
Mhm.
Yeah, America had its conscription army until the Vietnam crisis, and then that fared so poorly that the draft was abolished thereafter, even though it lives on in a sort of vestigial selective service system, as it's called. But I mean, it doesn't, no, since the draft isn't enforced, there's the selective service system doesn't really amount to all that much. But anyway, fascinating stuff, Lipton. We will be moving on to an article you wrote, but there is something on Streamlabs that I'll get to now. And I will just say that if you have a reasonable, responsible question or comment for Lipton or for myself, please do leave it via Streamlabs and leave it as soon as you can. Please don't save it all for the end. Thank you very much in advance. From Douglas Edward, 84. Has Lipton seen any change in his lifetime with how the white minority populations of the Caribbean are treated? Has the region avoided the excesses of wokeism? Also, does he have any plans to get his great YouTube content onto a podcast format?
All right, so let me respond to the second question. I appreciate that you're watching the show. People really seem to like the show, Joseph. I may put it on Spotify one of these days, but back to the first question. The white minority, like all minority groups in Jamaica, is extremely small. White people in the past, they owned large corporation and businesses, and some of them ventured into politics. But today, the white population in Jamaica is lacking in support for the country and political will. So some of them are still entrepreneurs. They own major companies, but they're not overly interested in politics. And like elites in other countries, they veer left. So on social media, their views are more likely to be on the left, but they're not as radical as the Americans. But
Mhm,
Jamaica does not have a serious intellectual or entrepreneurial class. So for example, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Russell Sage Foundation, wealthy people in Jamaica don't die and then bequeath millions to start research foundations or think tanks. This is not a Jamaican trait.
mhm. Very interesting. Doug Severin also asked if your region has avoided the excesses of wokeism. He means the Caribbean. Any thing to say
Yeah,
about that?
yeah, I have some brilliant examples. So, Jamaicans, Joseph, like to
Mhm.
mimic the American left.
Uh-huh.
America is an individualistic society, and Americans are also agentic. Jamaicans are more likely to conform, and they,
Mhm.
based on my observations, they really analyze issues for themselves. So recently, a young lady attended a school in Jamaica. She's not affiliated to Rastafarianism, but she has locks. And the principal said, well, not necessarily the principal, but the mandate of the school at the time was this: you need to remove the locks because locks may pollute the environment. The argument at the time was that the locks were inducing lice,
Mhm.
so the school had a problem with the girls locks and lies, whatever. But the matter went to court, and she lost the case. This was not surprising. The judge ruled that it was not a matter of religious freedom. The Constitution of Jamaica protects religious freedom. Religious freedom is enshrined in the Constitution. However, donning locks is not unique to Jamaica. Tribes in Africa don locks. The ancient Egyptians and some Greeks also wore locks. Locks are not unique to Jamaica. However, your hairstyle can constitute political speech. Therefore, if it could have been argued that protest culture is a form of political expression, then they would have had a case because locks can represent anti-colonialism, black nationalism, and protest culture. But the man and his partner, they were just done in locks. The locks did not represent a broader political picture. So obviously, the case failed, and a case of this nature should not have been adjudicated in the court. But the attorney, I guess, wanted fame, and the matter exploded. It was supported by the public, but then again, people really analyze these issues for themselves. So Rastafarianism is not popular in Jamaica. Most Jamaicans are not Rastafarians, but in order to project wokeness or to say that we're pro-black, they tend to promote Rastafarianism, but it's not that popular in Jamaica. So in that regard, wokeness is a problem because the case didn't need to see the daylight of court. And I wrote an article for America Thinker on the topic.
Very interesting. And I will just say before we go, before we move on to Lipton's article that we're about to address, speaking about monarchy, there were tribal monarchies among American Indians. As a matter of fact, and speaking of the Seminoles, one Seminole chief, he was referred to as King Payne, and Payne was the anglicization of his Indian name. And as a matter of fact, today, south of Gainesville, there is something called Payne's Prairie, a very nice wetland. It's dry too. It's really a savanna, and it was named after King Payne. So monarchy is not just something for people sitting on thrones in Europe, nor is it something that's for tribes in Africa specifically. It also was had among many American Indians, and a lot of the Europeans called the children of the tribal chiefs prince. They called the chiefs king, and it's just a different way of regardless of what we call a chief or king or sub chief or prince, whatever. Uh, it's really just a way of articulating monarchical titles, and obviously, the monarchy of the American Indians served them very, very well. They're much more effective than a republican system. It'd be hard to imagine an American Indian tribe having a republican move a tribal monarchy. That would be ridiculous from the onset. Lipton, before we move on, anything to say about that?
Yeah, I wanted to talk just briefly about Hawaii. Hawaii also has a history of political rule and monarchies and royalty. So it's not unusual for pre-European Americans to invest in monarchies and tribal authority. We know this because of books, other academic articles on warfare in Indian society, and TV.
Mhm. Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah, and so again, it's so often overlooked. But anyway, no, I'm glad we had that chat about monarchy. By the way, the book, for those who haven't heard about it for whatever reason, Runaway Masters, you can check it out now on Amazon. I hope that you do. Okay, now moving on to Lipton's article, National IQ. I think it's pretty straightforward, and it was published on July the 8th. And I'll just read the opening of it to sort of, I guess, set the stage, and then we'll get into the brass tacks. India, Nigeria, and Ghana are some developing countries known for the exploits of enterprising citizens. Due to the achievements of the smart fraction in poor countries, onlookers are puzzled by their relative poverty. Such an assessment is misguided because the national IQ is more important than the intelligence of outliers. National success requires large-scale cooperation, and intelligence predicts the propensity to cooperate. The future-oriented outlook of intelligent people motivates them to acknowledge the benefits of long-term planning. Beset by low IQ, less intelligent people are unlikely to appreciate the consequences of long-term reform. Very powerful words. Very glad to read them. Lipton, anything to say about what you wrote?
Of course, Joseph, never underestimate the power of IQ. Why
Mhm.
is IQ an advantage? IQ is an advantage because it enables smart people to navigate strange and unusual circumstances. So, for example, political reforms are necessary for economic success. Patience is can be dissected from IQ, but patience, self-control, and IQ are all correlated. There are studies showing a link between patience and economic development. Between IQ and economic development, IQ predicts the quality of governance, the level of corruption, the feasibility of R&D spending, and also patience and long-term orientation. And over the and for a few years, newer scholars have been doing several studies showing country differences in personality traits and IQ. And IQ is a robust predictor of many important personality traits. So a poor country in the Africa or the Caribbean will find it difficult to institute reforms because of low IQ. Jamaica's IQ, according to Lynn and Becker, is 75.08. For those who are interested in appreciating how they determine IQ levels, they can read the book. The book is online on Google, so I encourage them to read the book. A country like Jamaica will have problems. The IMF in 2009, we entered into a new IMF agreement. Public sector reform, pension reform, and tax reform formed the pillar of the agreement. The agreement broke down the PMP one in 2011. The PMP at the time had more political capital than the JLP. And because Jamaica was strapped for cash, the PMP and the JLP had to commit to the reform measures of the IMF. So insolvency reform was a plank of the program. Financial reform was also a plank, and making the tax system more efficient. Question, Joseph. Jamaicans are aware that the public sector is inefficient. They're aware that the tax system needs to be overhauled. So why did the IMF force them to implement these reforms? Two, political leaders often lack political will, and silly people cannot hold political leaders to account.
Mhm.
So in America, I love civil society. There's the Cato Institute, there's the Economic Policy Institute. In Jamaica, civil society is actually a group of people who criticize politicians for being corrupt. We don't have a version of the Cato Institute or even the institute that funds Chronicles. What's the name of that institute again?
The,
Not Charlie.
the Charlemagne
Yeah, the
Institute. That's it.
Charlemagne Institute. Jamaica doesn't have similar institutes. Intelligent people, because of their long term orientation, will start a community group called Citizens for Tax Reform. They don't need the IMF to say, Jamaica, you need to get your house in order. But low IQ countries will have problems, and this is one reason why crime is a problem in Jamaica, and why fatherlessness is a problem. Although, according to some anthropologists, Jamaican fathers are playing a bigger role, but even controlling for IQ and education, black women are still more likely to have children out of wedlock. And I've read this in studies done by economists and those who are more radical. Family formation is also linked to IQ. If one is able to delay gratification, then more than likely you will invest in children. Parental investment will be more abundant. So countries with low IQ, they have a morass of problems.
To say the least. And I'm going to skip down a bit in your article. I don't want to read the whole thing. I don't want to give it all away. But skipping down, you say viewing intelligent people as self-interested agents, it becomes obvious that they lack the motivation to confront problems bedeviling the population. After all, there is no guarantee that low IQ people will respect their efforts. National IQ further impacts the trajectory of poor countries in the realm of economics. There is a link between trade openness and economic growth. However, intuitively, protectionism sounds plausible. Since intelligence necessitates rising beyond instinctive thinking, low IQ people are hesitant to support pro market policies. In fact, studies assert that intelligent people are prone to think like economists. Moreover, market economies are better off, so the low IQ of poor countries, demonstrated by their preference for anti market policies, can partly explain their relative poverty. That's really interesting stuff, needless to
Yes.
say. Please, anything to say about it?
Yeah, yes, I do. So, for example, protectionism. I interviewed Jeffrey Williams recently. I don't know if do you remember Jeffrey? Jeffrey was once a rock star economist, but now he's in his
Mm-hmm.
80s. He did a lot
Yes.
of work on Latin America. He's still quite sharp. And Jeffrey argues that the history of free trade in America is more nuanced than we assume, and I agree with him. But here is the clincher, Joseph. Early economists were advocating protectionist policies for big countries like America. Small countries lack domestic markets. So, on average, small countries, the quality of their institutions is usually richer. Small countries, it's easier to manage small countries, and because they lack internal markets, small countries often penetrate the global market. So, there's a direct
Uh,
correlation between smallness, economic growth, and openness to trade. And when African countries promote pro market policies, their economies also grow. In Jamaica, there's this foolish saying eat what we grow, grow what we eat.
mhm,
No country can afford to produce all goods and services on its own. Secondly,
mhm,
from 1972 to 2007, Jamaica's productivity declined. And again, Jamaica is a small country. And what do we learn by studying economics? That small countries should engage in global trade. There's a big consensus on this topic. How do we link it to IQ? The IQ is 75.08. An IQ of 75, with an IQ of 75.08, people cannot reason properly. That is the level of mental instability for adults. IQ below 70 is retarded, but in the range 70 to 79, those people are basically children, although their bodies are like that of an adult. So trade policy becomes quite pivotal when we're discussing IQ, especially if the country is small. And
mhm,
again, low IQ people, their conception of time is different. Their mindset is closer to the scarcity mindset than the mindset of affluence. So
mhm,
we cannot discuss economic growth without mentioning IQ. I interviewed two not economists, psychologists, and they were interviewed on different days, and they did a joint paper arguing that IQ increases are also linked to increases in economic growth. We can't separate both.
No, I don't think it's possible to separate them myself. And now, moving down through the article again, I'm going to skip a bit because obviously I don't want to read the whole thing. Like I said, I want to give it away. By the way, folks, if you want to read the article, the title, once again, is National IQ by Lipton Matthews. Just type it in on Google and it should come up. But anyway, let's see. Where would be a good place to start? Okay, here. High IQ societies possess a larger percentage of citizens with above average ability. Studies articulate that exceptionally intelligent citizens, quote, generate relatively more national income and are more innovative, with those that have the lowest levels of IQ being less influential on economic development, end quote. Furthermore, related literature suggests that high IQ countries, quote, can offset the negative effects of weak IPR protection, end quote. As expected, due to higher cognitive abilities, intelligent people can exhibit resourcefulness in less than ideal circumstances, thereby accelerating innovation in the absence of appropriate institutions. Therefore, the innovation gap is explicable by poorer countries on average having less intelligent people. Very strong words there,
Yes,
Lipton, but
and I will
obviously
not
well founded.
recant. Yeah, I will not recant because I have surveyed the literature extensively.
Mhm,
I correspond with the authors. I've interviewed them. It is known as the smart fraction. And even when you read the mainstream economists like Joel Mokyr, what do they write? They argue that elites are crucial to growth. You can read
mhm,
Afner Griff. The British Industrial Revolution was driven by brilliant scientists and efficient workers, what people refer to as upper tail human capital. Studies have been done for Britain and France. We cannot get over this point. Intelligence is important, and only a small group of people are responsible for the majority of intelligence. So it's not intelligence, of intellectual output. And again, back to
mhm,
Jamaica or any other country with a minimal IQ level.
mhm,
Rich countries create STEM academies and research foundations to invest in the best and the brightest. And why should they not follow this path? Denmark became one of the reasons why Denmark became wealthy is because elites they were responsible for boosting the quality of the dairy sector.
mhm,
Elites had access to capital, culture, and a bourgeois outlook. The government in Jamaica brag that that they wanted to build STEM academies. Years ago,
mhm,
I wrote a letter to the editor saying that Jamaica needs STEM academies. It didn't go anywhere. At that point, I was interested in writing for Jamaican publications.
mhm,
So, by it was around 2020, the Prime Minister did a national address at a political event. He was representing his party, and he said Jamaica will construct STEM academies. STEM academies, and I said yes. Jamaicans are finally getting smart. And then one day I'm at home and I'm watching TV. And as you know, I have no tact. I only have tact when I respect people like Paul Godfrey. But if you're an idiot, sorry, you're not going to get my respect. So I'm watching TV. And these jackasses with degrees, they say the Prime Minister wants to build a STEM academy. That's elitist. It will result in inequality. And I'm like, so what? I study economic history for fun. All rich countries create institutions to promote the best and the brightest.
mhm,
And the problem with low IQ countries is that their smart fraction is not as smart as the smart fraction in a country like America or Singapore. Because the IQ is lower, outliers are also less impressive. So, for example, if the national IQ is 75.08, someone with an IQ of 107 or 120 is in the smart fraction. 120 represents superior IQ, but an IQ of 120 does not mean you're a genius. For you to be a genius, your IQ should be around 140, 130. However, someone with an IQ of 120 or 125 can be a genius dependent on his personality. So, geniuses are individualistic and they're open to new ideas. They're eccentric people. So, if my IQ, for example, let's say it's around 125, then I
mhm,
could be a genius because of my personality. So genius is a combination of intelligence and personality mix. But countries again with lower IQs, they're more conformist and hierarchical. So one academic did study saying that hierarchical countries are less likely to invent. Therefore, the smart faction is not only unimpressive, people who in countries like America are basically midwits, they are less innovative and less eccentric. So this is one way in which IQ can impact economic growth. Now back to your question, patents. Patents in contemporary societies impact growth because they allow entrepreneurs to secure investment. Why can they secure investments after getting a patent? Because the patent represents future wealth. But historically, patents do not explain economic growth. If you read Joel Mokyr and other big name economists, they will tell you that the British patent system was not really effective. In IIQ countries, smart people are able to transcend the negativities of the patent system. So they can create private patent pools. They may create a foundation to reward innovators. Therefore, IQ can supplant the disadvantages of an onerous patent system.
And as we begin to wrap up the article, once again, it is titled National IQ by Lipton Matthews. Just type it in on Google. It should come right up. I highly recommend that you check it out. You say at the end, I'll skip down to the end. I don't want to read the whole thing, don't want to give it away. But consequently, smart people are easier to lead, so intelligent people in low IQ countries will conclude that reforms and innovations are infeasible and instead opt to maintain power by genuflecting to the demands of the populace. For smart people to make a difference in spurring change, they must be held accountable by a discerning public. In short, highly intelligent people cannot maximize national gains when they are unable to overcome the problems posed by a predominantly low IQ population.
Yes, and I like to give anecdotal examples. So African leaders, Jomo Kenyatta, for example, Jomo
Mhm,
Kenyatta was smart. African dictators are not dumb, but because they're intelligent and the population is not as intelligent as the dictator, an incentive is created for the dictator to manipulate his people. And again, I live in Jamaica, so I can give Jamaican like examples.
mhm,
Lockdown. We have discussed the issue already in depth. Lockdowns are ineffective at slowing the spread of the coronavirus, according to several studies. The curfew was 9 p.m., it was adjusted to 11 p.m. But people are unlikely to follow rules, and again, IQ is linked to rule following. The less intelligent don't appreciate the concept of time, so they will disobey rules. The
mhm,
curfew is 9 p.m. You go to work, you go home. Prior to the curfew, I would attend some business events. With the curfew, I go to work and go home. But people like to party, they like to go to public spaces and idle. And then when the numbers spike and a lockdown is imposed, they complain. And as such, the country is going around in circles because intelligent people are difficult to control but easy to lead. Why are they easy to lead? Because they understand the concept of cost benefit analysis.
mhm. Really fascinating. A lot of people don't get the relationship between cost benefit analysis, and I think that contributes to no shortage of economic misunderstandings among them.
Yes, intelligent people will follow rules if the rules are in the national interest.
Mhm,
Intelligent people are revolutionary, but they're rebels with a cause.
mhm. Very, very true. Yeah, I think the intelligent people will follow rules if the rules are sensible, but at the same time, unintelligent people just look at rules and, in a very emotionalistic way, say, "No, I'm not going to do that." Blah blah blah, and it's really, really an interesting
Yeah.
contrast.
So Joseph, another quick point. Educated leaders also predict long-term development. Studies have been done for Africa and other places. And you know me, Joseph, I like to cite the studies.
Mhm.
One was done
Yes.
by a writer. The person's last name is a bit weird to pronounce, but the title is Africa First Leaders Make a Difference, and it was published by Econ Store. It's not hard to find. So educated leaders do make a difference, and I'm saying this to give another example. So the Caribbean, people in the Caribbean complain, we don't want to be a republic anymore. The European Union is a supranational organization. As conservatives and libertarians, we're not in favor of globalism. The European Union should have no right to impose laws on Jamaicans. The AU is not forcing Jamaicans or Asians to abide to its financial regulations. So in Jamaica, these leaders complain about the Queen. They say we need to become independent because we're still a subject of the Queen. We're not truly independent. But these same goons implement EU regulations,
Mhm.
even though they're inconsistent with the financial structure of the Caribbean. And these regulations do reflect neocolonialism. So again,
Mhm.
intelligent leaders, they understand cost benefit analysis. An intelligent leader is consistent. If he's against the Queen, he will also be against the neocolonial regulations of the EU.
Mhm.
Well, they didn't oppose
Very.
the EU's tax though, but in Jamaica, the bureaucrats complied with the EU's financial regulations, although they were in the wrong because the EU should just mind its business.
Indeed, it should. Arguably, it shouldn't exist. But yes, no, I do agree. It should mind its business, to say the absolute least. By the way, folks, if you have a reasonable and responsible question or comment for Lipton or myself, please leave it via Streamlabs. Leave it as soon as you can. Thank you very much. We won't be here forever. Now we're really about to change subject to talk about Russia and China, specifically the role both play in Africa. But before we do that, Lipton, I don't know if you've been hearing about it, but there's something of a dust up on social media because this very popular leftist
Nathan
influencer would be the term. His name is Hassan Piker. He's on Twitch. He does video games, that kind of thing. But he's a man on the left and he promotes leftism. And it was discovered that he's buying a $3 million house in West Hollywood. Which is Los Angeles County, California, and it's interesting because he, is very down on the rich. He wore a T-shirt saying "Eat the Rich," and a lot of his followers are angry now because not only is he a millionaire, but he's buying a multi-million-dollar house, and obviously it's quite hypocritical. But my take on people like Hassan Piker and other lefties in the media who make money off of the grievances of their followers is that these people are truly capitalists. They figured out a way to make money off of the idiocy of those who they appeal to, and they realize that these people are easy to extract cash from because they're just very fairly unintelligent people or very emotional people who are very ignorant about history and politics and economics, moreover. And I think that these left-wing influencers who get very wealthy, appealing to this demographic, they really are capitalists, even though they talk about capitalism being evil and socialism is great. Meanwhile, they're very wealthy people live in great neighborhoods. Anything to say about that before we move along?
Yeah, so for example, Nathan Robinson is an eloquent writer, but he's staunchly anti-capitalist. But Nathan
Mhm.
Robinson is in trouble. Why? He brags about workplace democracy, but he does not want it for current affairs. So I'm not surprised. These people, in
Mhm.
essence, are
Mhm.
banking on the idiocy of gullible men and women. They're business
Mhm.
people. And like Hassan Piker, I don't know much about him, but why I being wealthy is not a problem. I like it when people achieve great wealth, but why are they so rich? Why do people even pay attention to people like
Mhm.
him?
Exactly. Exactly correct. No, you're absolutely right. It's interesting, but they do. And he makes money off of them, and I don't fault him for making money off of them. But at the same time, obviously he doesn't practice what he preaches. But I think that his followers take him more seriously than he takes himself.
Yeah, look, leftists are basically comedian. There's not a big difference between leftists and the grifter right. They're all the
Mhm.
same. They're
Mhm.
comedians, and very few of them are bright. So Ben
Mhm.
Shapiro could be one of the smarter ones, and I
Mhm.
personally like Michael Knowles. But on average, many of these men and women are idiots. So, for
Mhm.
example, Tommy Lauren is a pretty girl, but what is the intellectual content of Tommy Lauren or whatever her name is?
Mhm. Not much. Not much at all, to say the absolute least. It's really sad that so many people are attracted to these sort of vapid commentators, but it goes that has a lot to do with intelligence. The national IQ of the U.S. is declining, so it's not surprising that people who don't offer very intelligent takes are going to find a great deal of prominence.
No, but before we end the discussion, I must admit these people are very intelligent. The average man will never graduate to the intermediate class or even to
Mhm.
the graduate class. And as such, if you're an intelligent people, you will bank on the stupidity of dumb people.
Mm.
It's an
Very
easy
true.
way to make money.
Yes, it is. That's absolutely correct. That really, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is an easy way to make money. No two ways about that. And now for our last topic of discussion tonight. But as I did mention, if you have a reasonable and responsible question or comment for Lipton or myself, please leave it via Streamlabs. I threw the link into the live chat, but I'll throw it in again just in case. This is not the last call, but this is the call before the last call. So get your stuff in as soon as you can. Now, there is an article that you also want to discuss, Lipton, if I could ever find it here, from moderndiplomacy.eu, titled Russia and China, Geopolitical Rivals and Competitors in Africa. Very interesting stuff. You were interviewed for it, and I mean, it's definitely worth reading. I hope people check it out. It's not. I thought it was longer than it is. Actually, it's not terribly long, but obviously we won't have time to get to the whole thing here. But so, what is the gist of the article, Lipton? What were you interviewed about?
The gist of the article, Joseph, is that Russia and China prefer a multipolar world. Russia and China do not want to dominate the world. Russia and China in the near future may compete for hegemony in the Central Asian region, but on average, they are not interested in toppling the hegemony of Americans. And why would they want to become the next America? Being a superpower is expensive.
Mhm,
Russia had an actual empire, unlike America, and the Russian Empire collapsed, like the Swedish Empire, because empires are expensive. And China also had a long empire, and scholars argue that the Chinese empire inhibited growth because empires promote stability and not innovation. So modern Russians and Chinese are want to create a spoiler role in US politics. And this is why they use social media and even activist groups in energy to distract the American people. But they have no intention to become the next superpower because being a superpower is costly, expensive, and Russia and China, they both have a policy of non interference. Secondly, the issue also discussed the role of China in Africa. African leaders actually appreciate the dominance of China. And this is how I start the piece. African experts like Peter Kagwanja and Ram Antala Mohammed Osman have rubbished the claim that China is colonizing Africa. In general, African leaders perceive China to be the driving force behind modernization in the region. For example, during 2001 to 2002, China's direct investment in sub-Saharan Africa increased by 53% yearly, dwarfing American investment that grew by a mere 14%. The Chinese are building infrastructure in Africa, and the Russians have an interest in modernizing the natural resource sector in Africa. Furthermore, Russia and China did not have colonies in Africa, and neither did Russia and China invest in colonies in the black world. So this will play a role in the preference for these countries. Lastly, Russia is not a member of the political West. What's Christianity in Russia? The Orthodox Church. So politically and philosophically, Russians are different from white Americans, the French, and the British. Therefore, because Russians and Chinese can distinguish themselves from Westerners, they're preferred by Africans.
mhm. Very, very
Yeah,
interesting.
that's the essence of the article.
Mhm, certainly. No, I think that it's really
Yes.
something else how Russia and China are coming to hold more power on the global stage, but especially in the Middle East. I think it's interesting to see what will become of the Middle East once the U.S. is totally out of there, which is well in the process of happening. Fascinating stuff.
Yes.
Anything to say
So
about, I
yeah,
suppose?
that
Sure, go ahead.
re- repeat what you were about to say.
Oh, I was just going to ask you if any comments on what's going to happen in the Middle East with Russia and China, given that the U.S. is rapidly
Well,
departing the region.
Your audience, the people who listen to this show are obviously smart, and because they're smart, they are aware that the founding fathers did not envision America to become a global empire. Some have argued that the Americans should have allowed Afghanistan to remain a client state of the Soviet Union. I'm not an expert in this issue, but I can say liberal humanitarianism is a failure, and it's time for America to scale back its foreign policy excursions.
Mhm. It absolutely is. It is. I mean, America simply was not going to create a sort of Western style democracy in Afghanistan. It was specifically wanted to create sort of like some kind of Jeffersonian democracy, but with a more PC tilt, if that makes any sense. It's kind of hard to describe, but the U.S. spent decades trying to get this done, and it just didn't work out. What else is there to say? And it's failed spectacularly.
Ted Galen Carpenter has several books and articles on the topic. American imperialism failed in Latin America, and it basically failed everywhere. And it is expensive for the American people, but beneficial for the military industrial complex.
It certainly is, no question about it. It's a very unfortunate phenomenon, to say the absolute least. But it's the
And then
situation.
remember, the Taliban, the Taliban are influenced by a different strand of Islam that's more mystical. They're religious
Mhm.
people. They're serious about building a state that's predicated on the Sharia law. Islam is an old religion, and Islamic civilization are even older than some Western civilizations. And the consensus is in political science is that it can take years or even centuries to change culture. Americans can never change the culture of the Middle East. Most of those countries are not democratic. They're tribalistic and clannish, and they're not going to change.
No, they're not. And it's very foolish for people to expect that the U.S. can change these places. Especially considering that the U.S. is hardly in any position to tell other countries what to do because the situation domestically here is so terrible. So it's something else, put mildly. Anyway, now I will make the last call. If you have a reasonable and responsible question or comment for Lipton or myself, please do leave it via Streamlabs. The last call is going out right now. So get your stuff onto Streamlabs as soon as you can. Thank you very much in advance. So, Lipton, as we do wind things down here, I think that really the whole matter of IQ, it needs to be discussed more, but it's not getting the discussion it needs because obviously it's too controversial. But you also wrote rather critically of Charles Murray's new book titled "Facing Reality." In a nutshell, what's your take on what he wrote?
So I interviewed Charles Murray. I met him once when he tutored us at AEI. In 2017, I was a student at AEI. Participated in AEI Summer Honors Program. And Charles Murray in real life is okay. But Charles Murray role is very broad. He is a mainstream scholar who's able to distill complicated research. People listen to Charles Murray. Charles Murray has an audience, and because he has an audience, Charles should use its influence to delve more deeply into critical issues like racial differences in psychopathology, racial differences in time preference, delayed gratification, impulsivity, and even promiscuity. So the Facing Reality is an introductory book for the average person. But if you are at the intermediate stage, or if every now and then you read an article or you read an article on IQ, Reality does not add significant value. It adds value, but not extensive value. So psychopathology predicts well-being and criminal activity, and the racial variance in psychopathology is low. But as I said to Edward Dutton when he interviewed me, when you're an academic, the variance should be like 0.02%, 0.25%. You don't want to see a variance of 2% or even 20%. These are scary numbers. So a small variance of 0.1% can portend serious consequences. And in the article, I cite a study that was conducted by Robert Plowman and several other scholars, and they argue that personality traits are indeed heritable, and they too, in combination with general ability, can explain academic performance.
Fascinating stuff. It's interesting because Charles Murray is very much disliked by the left. But in many respects, when it comes to drawing conclusions about his research on IQ, he's very tame. He sort of backs off from
Yes,
saying too much. It's bizarre that he's thought of as, what he's perceived as being by so many
exactly
people.
my point. Like white nationalists dislike Charles Murray, and he doesn't like white nationalists.
Mhm.
Charles Murray is a bright guy, but Charles Murray is not a member of the dissident right. Charles Murray is not reading John Derbyshire.
Mhm.
Charles Murray doesn't care for Richard Lynn, and Richard Lynn is
Mhm.
one of the major figures in IQ research.
Yes, yes.
Gerhard Meisenberg, formerly of Mankind Quarterly, is another stalwart. These are not people who are well, I won't use the word like, but Charles Murray is not overly interested in these characters.
Mhm.
Edward
No, he's
Newton.
not. No, you're right. No, he's not. So it's rather interesting that he gets this bizarre rap, but
Yes.
he does.
Well, I interviewed him and he did a good job in the interview because, and I should interview you at some point,
I'd
Joseph.
be glad to.
But
I'd be
but
glad
when
to.
I interviewed Charles Murray, we stuck to the crucial issues. I didn't ask stupid questions like, "How should the public explore your research or interrogate your research?" I don't care about the political consequences of Charles Murray's research. I
Mhm.
care about the science. And Charles Murray was interviewed by many YouTubers, and they all pose the same silly questions. Oh my god, the black white IQ gap, is that scary or should we deal with it? Guess what, Joseph? One
Mhm.
of the most consistent findings in in intelligence research is the black white IQ gap. It is
Mhm.
replicable, and there is a replicability crisis in psychology.
Mhm. It's an issue that obviously like no one wants to deal with, but at the same time, it's obviously an issue, and the lack of, shall I say, an incentive in addressing it is obviously strong, especially with wokeness. But over time, one would think that something that which is a scientific reality, one would think that it would be addressed, one way or another, but denying the facts is something of a pastime nowadays with wokeness.
Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
then Charles Murray is only willing to go so far. So you would
Mm-hmm.
not write a book on racial differences in self control or even individualism.
Mm-hmm. No, it would be a very different prospect to say the least.
But Charles Murray is elderly, so he has the chance to write these books and not get into trouble.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, he does. You're right. Whether or not he find a publisher though is interesting.
He can always contact countercurrents.
That would be something else.
Yes.
I think they would publish him, but I think it might give him a heart attack.
Yes.
It would, and then that would be something else. Like somebody can make a documentary about it. Anyway,
Yeah.
so the last call has been made, but I will check Streamlabs again in a minute, and yeah, I'll see if there's anything else there. But I think I know this has been a great conversation, Lipton. I'm very glad we were able to have it. Thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Yes, but Joseph, remember we're going to talk a little about Nick Cannon.
Oh yes, yes,
Yes.
yes, yeah. I forgot. I'm sorry. That slipped my mind.
Yes.
Please bring up anything you'd like to bring up
Yeah.
about
So Nick Cannon was interviewed by some guy. Yeah, I don't care much for these clones. And the guy asked, I believe the guy asked him about his promiscuity, and he said,
it.
"Okay,
Yes.
I have in 1 year I impregnated a couple of women. In 1 year I impregnated several women, and
Mhm.
it's somewhat Eurocentric to assume that I should have done otherwise." And I'm like, Eurocentrism is a worldview, just like Afrocentrism. It is
Yes.
a philosophy to explain human behavior and how people interact. And secondly, monogamy predicts savings, long term development, family formation, and
Mhm.
parental investment. So, in polygamous families, Even when the man is affluent, monogamous families are likely to do better because they're able to distribute their resources in a more equitable manner. So to impregnate several women in 1 year and not be ashamed makes you an ass.
It does. It's very careless behavior, which is going to cause a lot of problems down the line because you're creating broken families, obviously.
Yes, and i- these are issues that we must explore. So men relative to women are more promiscuous, but one demographer now deceased, he started a project to explain why Africans were promiscuous, but he died when he died, and I think this is an issue that we should examine: racial differences in promiscuity. So Lisa Wade, she does study not on promiscuity, but her graph indicated that black males were slightly more promiscuous than white males, and that I said before, even if the variance is small, the long-term consequences can be deleterious.
Yes, to say the absolute least. And you see these unfortunate consequences on display in many inner city neighborhoods of the U.S., where life is far from a bowl of cherries, put mildly.
Yes, and it's a human capital formation is impacted by the family. When parents live together, they cooperate and invest in their children. And studies do show when they live apart, they may use the children as a tool to spite each other. So it negatively affects human capital formation.
Mhm. It absolutely does. And you think people would get this by now because it's something so glaringly obvious, but they don't. And it's really interesting to see people, chalk up a desire for a more stable society to Eurocentrism or whatever. It's absurd. They're actually basically making a European supremacist argument. I don't even think they realize that they're doing this, ironically.
No, they don't. But I'm not a supremacist of any sort, but
Mhm.
let's be objective. Delayed gratification is actually one of the hallmarks of the West. You can
Mhm.
read Joseph Henrich. The nuclear family is another prominent feature of the West. You can read Peter Laslett and Alan McFarlane. Time preference is also a feature of the West, and these combinations induce mass based flourishing. So I am in favor of Western supremacy, and the biggest example of Western supremacy is migration. People are not migrating to Japan or Singapore. Why would they? These countries have rules, they're strict, and Japan is not in favor of immigrants, but the West will open its borders to accommodate foreigners.
Mhm.
So I'm in favor of Western supremacy, not white supremacy, but the culture that emerged in the West is predominantly white. White
Mhm.
people are more likely to exhibit these traits. So someone called John Derbyshire a white supremacist because he said if by white supremacy we're saying that society is headed by whites are better off, then he's some well I'm just paraphrasing, but then he's in favor of that form of supremacy. And I'm not polemical, but if we're being objective, that's the truth. Many non white societies have been incapable of conducing mass based flourishing.
Mhm. Indeed, the whole subject matter is fascinating, and it deserves far more due than it gets. But we live in the society that we live in, and people like stupid, easy answers to complex questions, and that often leads them to accept resolutions that aren't resolutions at all. They really just believe in nonsense that
Hmm.
everyone's supposed to pretend is the truth because that's what the new religion of wokeness dictates.
Yeah. Yeah, but do you have any questions?
No, no, I know I'm
Also,
just listening with rapt attention.
yeah.
No, it's been a fascinating chat, Lipton. Thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Yes, and when will this go up?
This shall go up next week. I'm not sure on what day, but I'll be sure to send it out to you by email and on Twitter. And I hope that people enjoyed the show tonight. I certainly did, and I hope you enjoyed your appearance, Lipton.
Of course, and where can I see the comments? Because do you have like live comments?
There is the live chat, but that will go. It won't be visible once the stream on YouTube is private, and then I take it down and I put it up on Rumble as a video upload, and on numerous podcasting outlets. So there are comments available though on Rumble for people who want to comment.
But are you on YouTube? Is the channel still on YouTube?
Oh yeah, right now it is. Yeah, but it'll be
Oh,
taken down permanently.
oh, but you're only on Odyssey permanently.
Not on Odyssey at all. We're on Rumble for uploads, and we're on podcasting outlets like Apple, Google, Spotify for people who want to listen to audio only. But it's we're on YouTube just for the live streaming, Kato Godfrey. Then we take it down because YouTube has some crazy content policies. You don't know what the hell it's going to do next. So you just have to basically.
So far, my show has been doing. I interviewed John Derbyshire, and I'm still on YouTube. And
Excellent.
Jim Gold.
Yeah, excellent. No, that's wonderful. It's just that YouTube is so unreliable. But what are you going to do?
All right. Okay, then. Bye.
Absolutely. Take it easy, everyone. Thanks again for appearing, Lipton. And by the way, as a matter of fact, I'll chat with Lipton after we're off air about the book. But I will say that thank you very much for having tuned in, everyone. See you next time. Before we go, though, if you like this episode and want to support the show, please consider donating to it by clicking on the PayPal link in the description below. Paul and I appreciate your generosity very much. Also, consider checking out my new book, which I'm holding upside down. How stupid is that? Consider checking out my new book. It's on Amazon. I think you might like it. Cheers, all. Take it easy. Okay, and finally, here we are.